It's a pleasure to be here today to be able to talk with you a little bit about school librarianship and school libraries. We're going to spend a little bit of time today working on some of the thorny policy issues that need to be addressed across education in general. My colleagues will be bringing different perspectives. I'm going to introduce everybody in just a moment. But different perspectives on how do we unwind, if you will, the issues around the accountability measures for schools and districts in the state plan for education. How do we unwind some of the issues around equity, around accountability, around improvement both of the student learning experience as well as improvement of professional development? It's all rooted in what we hope to suggest to you. How do we do this with one of the biggest marooned assets currently in schools? The idea of the marooned asset, where the school library itself is marooned right now if it doesn't have a school librarian in it. And if the movement has been towards classroom libraries, away from school library collections that support the curriculum, perhaps that is a marooned asset as well. Or it's been, if I can strain the metaphor, washed up on the shores and converted into something other than what it should be, which is the largest classroom in the school. We're going to take a few minutes today. I'm going to take you through a little bit of where our approach is around accountability, and then some of the studies that we would suggest, can help prove a point, whether it's to a state administration, Department of Education, state board, to your own district level administration, to help prove a point around how the presence of an effective school library program staffed by a state-certified school librarian with the right kind of aids in place can be a solution to not every single issue within the state education plan, but some of the big thorny ones. Whether you're at a 1 to 10 index or an A to F report card for your schools, it's been a couple years since we've had to go through that because there's been this implementation period for all of the state education plans, all the state ESSA plans, the Every Student Succeeds Act plans. That implementation period is coming to an end, and it will turn into an accountability period. The accountability that we need to think through around failing schools is coming back, and the need for continuous improvement is always present. In developing their state ESSA plans, each of the states had a wide range of discretion to be able to go through and talk about or try and implement policies that would fix some of the ongoing problems and help create new opportunities for student learning. Those measures around the country vary from state to state to state, and I'm sure each and every one of you sitting through all of these panels and presentations here at EDU, there is a variance, if you will. But generally speaking, top-level accountability measures include fairly prosaic things: English language learning, 3rd and 4th grade reading proficiencies, career readiness, which I want to put a little asterisk next to in particular because the focus on college readiness is fantastic, and that's a natural place for school libraries, but the focus on career readiness that isn't necessarily taught in a classroom, well, it could be taught in the largest classroom in the school, which is the library. Science proficiencies, well-rounded education, student growth. Equity is a key issue as well. The equity issues around education are baked into all of the state plans. Our panel today is made up of school librarians, library educators, and education professionals. We want to share with you some of the thrilling insights that come from understanding these studies that have been done, statistically significant impact studies that prove that we've got some solutions to some of these accountability measures. One of the other interesting accountability measures that's in almost every state plan is something around truancy and graduation rates. I want to put a little asterisk by that as well, saying that we don't have a solution necessarily to truancy directly in the school library system. This is not a one-size-fits-all type panel. It is, though, something I hope that will be an interesting new approach to policies that can extend and support the goals that your systems have. We would like to talk with you today about how districts and states can and should adopt these policies along with funding formulas that include effective school library programs and school librarians. And we'd like this to be a dialogue as well. We'll take time at the end for questions from both the room here at the microphone and on the Slido app. The Slido app is available to you through the South by Southwest app or at slido.com with the hashtag of South by Southwest SXSW EDU. I'll be proctoring that Slido at the end, and I would love to have your input here in the room as well. So we're using this metaphor of the largest classroom in the school for two big reasons. It's the fact that the school library program is open to every kid. It's open, theoretically, if it's in existence to you, in your school, to every child, and that the librarians themselves are the instructors, guides, coaches, and teachers. We want to provide you with some actionable insights that can help you address, with an effective school library program, those key ESSA goals. Again, my name is John Chrastka, Executive Director of EveryLibrary, the Political Action Committee for Libraries, as well as the research institute called the EveryLibrary Institute. My colleague to my left is Kafi Kumasi. She's Associate Professor in the School of Information Sciences at Wayne State University. She researches and teaches in the areas of school librarianship, youth culture, research methods, and equity in schools. To her left is my colleague Allison Mackley. She is a National Board Certified Teacher Librarian and Instructional Technology Coach. She is current president of the Pennsylvania School Librarians Association and is a member of the Governor's Advisory Council on Library Development there. And she'll be talking with us a little bit about improving student learning and outcomes. And then to her left, Azadeh Jamalian is an entrepreneur and founder of The Giant Room. It's an innovation hub for students in elementary and middle schools. She holds a PhD in cognitive science from Columbia University, and she'll be focusing our conversation about enhancing professional development. Okay, so what do we know from the studies? Because form follows function, a school library that supports the curriculum has to have a certain form to it, of course, but the studies that indicate what the form should be. Findings from more than 60 impact studies in 22 states show that schools with a well-equipped library, staffed by a full-time state-certified school librarian, and that have an appropriate support staff contribute significantly to gains in student learning. Numerous studies have examined the impact that libraries have on student achievement. We have known all of this for a very long time, and it is one of the most hidden aspects. Well, we have to talk about why that is a little bit, and sometimes it's because the librarians in the world don't necessarily toot their own horn. The other reason is that at certain points, it's very easy to cut a single person in a school. And so you've lost that sort of competitive edge, but you've also lost that picture towards resource, and there's a bit of grieving that has to go on, I think, amongst administrators, amongst leaders, to understand that they might have done something that isn't necessarily the best for their kids. We've known about this for a long time. It goes back as far as the mid-90s, but in Florida, we've known since 2003 that elementary schools where library programs are staffed at least 60 hours do 9% better on test scores than those libraries that are staffed less than 60 hours. It's not just the collection. It's the person and persons in the room who are doing that instructional support, that are providing the waypoints for those kids, that are doing individualized learning, those little moments of connection that are so necessary and that are facilitated by having the largest classroom available. We've known since 2012 in Pennsylvania that nearly 8% more students scored advanced in reading, which, if you recall, is a key metric in the accountability measures in your state, most likely, scored advanced in reading on the Pennsylvania system of school assessments when there was a full-time certified librarian. 9% better than in schools without. We've known this for years. Why aren't we picking this up? Why aren't we picking this up? We've known since 2010 in New York that elementary schools with a certified library media specialist have higher test scores. And in elementary schools with a certified versus non-certified library media specialist, students have significantly higher achievement scores on fourth grade ELA. Again, thinking back to, and if you're not familiar with your own state's accountability measures, it would be a good idea to check in because that's where the money's going to flow. The money's going to flow towards fixing the problems, those failing schools, whether it's on a 1 to 10 scale or an A to F scale. The money's going to flow to programs that have been proven effective. And if we have to prove the negative because there's not a school librarian there, if we have to prove the negative because there's not a school library program, I want to share with you one or two more studies. Our colleague Keith Curry-Lance and Linda Hofshire, fantastic researchers out of the Library Research Services at the Colorado State Library, showed as far back as 2011 that average reading scores for poor students, black students, Latino students improved in states that gained librarians over the last couple of years and diminished in states that lost librarians. Okay, cool. Reading, reading, reading. It's the core of many of the accountability standards, but you might recall that so is math and science. Good news, we've known since 2015 in Washington State that a certified school librarian was also a predictor of higher elementary and middle school math scores. Graduation rates, which we had talked about a little bit before, and test scores in reading and math were significantly higher in schools with high-quality libraries and certified librarians. Okay, there is a pathway forward here, potentially, to address some of those intractable problems. And yet, we are in a climate right now where school librarian positions are continually being cut. Since 2000, over 10,000, the year 2000, over 10,000 public librarian positions have been cut in public schools. This affects private schools as well. Private schools, there's been a decrease from 2011 to 2015, the last time we had data on this, of about 1,400 librarians across the country. For charter schools, folks, this situation, if I was a charter school provider, I would look at school librarians as being the killer app, the thing that differentiates your charter from everybody else because we have this instructional learning support there. For charters, the last comprehensive look that we have is in 2012. Well, the most recent one, just as an example, is the LA Unified School District's charters. 42 of 44 responding schools in a sample indicated they had a library space, but it was empty. Only 8 of those charters had librarians. In Chicago, my hometown, Chicago Public Schools used to have 1 librarian per school as recently as 2012. Now it's down to 139 school librarians for more than 600 schools. Philadelphia's got 11 school librarians left in the entire system. There are some heroic things happening amongst parents and stakeholders, people who care, like you do, about the whole life of the child, about educational outcomes, where they're trying to put volunteers in to fill in that gap and stand in that gap. We'd like to posit, though, that a place like Philadelphia or Chicago, in your district also, should be addressing this. The lack of libraries and librarians is affecting students in rural, urban, and suburban districts of all sizes and all levels of wealth. It cuts across race and class lines and is one of the easiest, most cost-effective, high-impact ways to influence the accountability measures. I'd like to turn some of this discussion over to my colleague, Kafi Kumasi, to talk about the equity and accountability issues, the idea that at-risk students, privileged students, folks from all walks of life, the school librarian is a great equalizer, and it's not just the nobility of that statement, there's strategy and there's outcomes behind it. Kafi?
Thank you, John. So I'm coming at this, yeah, all right, here we go. Good afternoon. Are we in the afternoon yet? So John laid out a wonderful basis for us to kind of have a more free-flowing conversation. We got a lot of stats, we got a lot of information. I'm going to talk about equity because we're at South by Southwest, and I've never been here, but one thing I've kind of got a sense is that this is a creative conference for expressing new ideas and new ways, and so I'm going to be talking about equity in the school library and using lessons from hip hop to help us understand how we can address issues of equity in the school library. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I would consider myself a hip hop generation. I would consider myself an urban educator. I was a former K-12 educator, turned school librarian. I have my PhD in curriculum studies. So issues of curriculum and equity and youth culture are at the center of my work. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to not just advocate for school libraries, but help students understand that their own literacies can be, really enhanced and enlivened through a dedicated school librarian who understands how to make those connections. But when we talk about equity, I want to start by defining how I think about equity, because too often I think it gets conflated with issues of equality. And the difference for me, equity, is that it's systemic and that it addresses systemic oppression that has been, as John refers to it, baked into the social fabric of institutions, whether it's housing, whether it's school. Those kind of things are systemic and they don't happen by accident. Whereas equality takes more of a one-size-fits-all approach to addressing issues of equity, and I think, and sometimes that's necessary, but I'm going to be talking about the ways in which equity needs to be addressed more at systemic level. So I would offer that the main issue, the intractable issue John spoke about, is the low literacy performance of our students, and that our education system is broken, not the students. So we have a system where American students are underperforming their international peers in terms of traditional literacy assessments. And so this isn't just an urban problem. Sometimes in America we like to talk about, a racial achievement gap and how underperforming students in urban communities are doing. But I would offer that urban students are simply a symptom of a larger broken system, and like the canary in the coal mine metaphor, the canary represents, the dead canary in the coal mine instance represents a dangerous gas being present. So the urban students are alerting, the underperformance of urban students represent a school system that is underperforming, and that we need to address the system and not the kids who are broken. So some of the, I'm gonna give you a quick snapshot of some of the literacy landscape in Michigan to kind of give you a sense of where we are. A lot of it dovetails right into what John said, but just in Michigan in particular, some quick stats. Only 8% of schools have a certified school librarian in Michigan. So 92% of students don't have access to a certified school librarian. 47th, Michigan ranks 47th in 3rd and 8th grade reading literacy performance. So, and those are not coincidental. We believe that there is a correlation. Keith Curry Lance's research and John's research that he cited talked about the correlation between strong schools, libraries, and student achievement. So we know there's a correlation between low literacy and the lack of the presence of school librarians. And again, this is not just an urban problem. It's a statewide problem. Our state, not just Detroit, the state itself is 47th in the nation in 3rd grade reading. So a lot of times what happens is well-meaning people want to address this problem from a school library perspective, but what happens is they don't look at it from an equity standpoint. They look at it as equality. So they'll do these one-off initiatives. So for example, and this is a commendable, I like to use this example, but I want to make sure that I recognize that it's a commendable effort. So Reggie Jackson Pistons dedicated books to a struggling school in Detroit, and gave lots of money and resources, called it a literacy lounge. The coverage on the news was very rampant, and so it was a good effort, but the issue is when the lights dim, what happens to those books if there's no one there dedicated to make the connections between the teachers, the students, the technology, and the books, and someone there to bring the books to life, so to speak. So a lot of times you have one-off initiatives that, again, are well-meaning, but who else is better prepared in the school library to provide that aerial view of the curriculum, the technology, the professional development, pull all those pieces together in a school library? A school librarian is, and regardless of what you call that person, that's a person who has a teacher certification in every state that I know, and the endorsement on top of the teacher certification is the school librarian. So I teach school librarians, future school librarians, and what we've done at Wayne State University is address the supply and demand issue. Michigan Department of Education recently declared school librarians are on the critical shortage list, so we're beginning to see some inertia and some synergy around advocating for students' right to school librarians. So the Michigan Department of Education wrote a resolution to students' right to have a school librarian. We've had several professional associations, the Michigan Reading Association, again, get on board and write resolutions to support students' right to access school libraries. So we've got professional support. We've got some support in the legislature. Actually, 3 Congress people brought bills forth that haven't quite made it to the table, but they've brought bills forth to support school libraries. So we've had some inertia there. But again, coming back to this point, what does this have to do with hip hop? So I would say that the normalized deficit that we see in school library is the same context in which hip hop was birthed. So although the roots of hip hop definitely go back further than the 1970s in the Bronx, and actually can be relegated to the African roots and the griot, and you all know the story of storytellers and how the role griots played in that community. But I would say that the context of disinvestment in urban cities brought on by white flight, brought on by the civil rights era, that context was where deficit was normalized. And so you had a situation where creativity, this new emerging art form called hip hop, where you had new scratching techniques, DJing, MCing, graffiti. All these things were birthed in the context of a normalized deficit. So I would say that there's an opportunity for school librarians to similarly kind of capitalize on this normalized deficit and look at hip hop as part of the solution for addressing systemic inequity. So we can learn a lot from hip hop. One of the other things I wanted to mention about hip hop and school libraries, there's some other parallels that I wanted to draw out. So like hip hop, culture has not been static. It's always moving. It's always incorporating new aspects. So, you know, you had collaborations like Aerosmith and Run DMC, so bringing in country and rock music into the genre. Popular language, you know, we went from popular language like bling bling to now ratchet. So hip hop vernacular is mainstream. So it's always been something that's synonymous with mainstream American culture and also youth culture. If you weren't aware, hip hop is the most revenue generating genre of music currently out there. And so we can learn some things about the power and sway of hip hop of culture to understand. School libraries have a similar role. So school libraries don't have a curriculum per se. We teach people how to learn. So learning how to learn is our curriculum. And that curriculum hasn't been static over the years. So we've had initially, we talked about bibliographic instruction and helping people learn how to use the library, and we've morphed into information literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, really helping people understand the information. We're sort of information brokers or CIOs, and sometimes new phrasing for the role school librarians play in the community, the people who are connecting people with information and helping them understand how to evaluate that information, how to find it, how to critically discern whether it's correct, you know, misinformation. We talk about all those things in school libraries. But I want to go back to a point John said about you can have the resources, but the teaching component is fundamental. So just like hip hop, you can talk about some of the misogynistic or the homophobic elements of hip hop, but I would argue, the most prolific hip hop artists, going back to KRS-One, now J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, these are teachers. And the best hip hop artists are able to educate, talk about what's happening in the world, but also do it in a way that's educating. And so that's one of the things I think school librarians are also that one person in the school who can bring all the pieces together and teach. So finally, I wanted to offer, so what does systemic equity for my panelists look like in school libraries? I would think we have some lessons we can learn also from the medical field. So the medical field, we call hospitals, and we call physicians doctors or physicians. There are specialists within, but similar thing happens in school librarianship, where we call school librarians media specialists, media techs, instructional consultants, you name it. And across the American Association of School Library has said that the preferred terminology is school librarians, but I think there's some lessons we can learn from medicine, because the idea that you have one person in the school, which I would say in order to address systemic inequity, you need the recommended model would be like 3 to 5 school librarians in a school. So you would have 3 to 5 specialists. So one specialist would be the tech integrationist. Another person would be the programming person who might, coordinate author visits or one book, one school efforts. Another specialist would be the curriculum integrationist or the mapping, so collaborating with teachers, helping them learn how to teach. And again, I'm going back to those 3 roles. School librarians help teachers teach, they're tech leaders in the school, and they promote reading. And so regardless of what we call ourselves, I think that we can learn from the medical school. So we can call it a school library, and we can call ourselves school librarians and a school library media center, but we need to address the whole child by having a team of specialists, just like doctors. If you have cancer, you have a team of specialists you go see, so they know the symptoms of your problem. They know what the previous treatment has been. So there are best practices around this in medicine that I think we can use in school libraries. So I would argue that systemic equity needs to be not one shot in the arm. It needs to be a radical sort of team specialist approach to enhancing literacy outcomes for our students. So yeah, Allison, talk about equity, but you could also elaborate however you like.
Yeah, if we can move on. The opportunity to talk about this from an equity perspective is key. It's one of the core aspects of each and every state education plan right now, today, tomorrow, the next day. The other component of it that's a key is what Allison's going to be talking about around school improvement and how do we keep moving forward when we are lacking one of the key collaborators. Well, how do we fix that, Allison, I should say?
I just want to mention something about what Kafi said, and she said that our education system is broken. And one of the things that I heard yesterday, someone asked, like, what is this school doing right? It was during one of the sessions I attended yesterday, and the answer was everything else. So we have to think about what is that everything else that we are not doing right now, that maybe we can't even imagine what's happening. So I just wanted to mention that, and I love Kafi's idea of this team of specialists, because I think that that is part of what brings equity to our schools and the opportunities for our students. But the role of school librarians and effective school libraries are integrated into our federal education policy through ESSA, which is different than what it was through No Child Left Behind. ESSA includes provisions that authorize but don't require school districts to include it in their local plans. So a few stats from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 500 school districts, and 22 of them do not have librarians at all. One of those school districts is Philadelphia, which is probably the largest school district in our state. Of the 214 public schools in that school district, they have 7 librarians. So that's over 200,000 students who don't have access to a librarian and that literacy instruction, especially at the early age when students are learning to read. In Pennsylvania, of those 115, of the school districts only have 1 librarian serving the entire school district, and 252 school districts have a librarian who's serving in multiple schools. So we have to turn around the idea about the value of a librarian and the time that they can spend in schools. Like John said, there are over 60 studies completed over the past 20 years that truly demonstrate that with a full-time certified school librarian, there is an increase in academic achievement, higher test scores, regardless of socioeconomic status. And without those school librarians, our students don't have the same opportunities to succeed later in life. So one of the questions right now is, like, why do we need a school librarian? We could talk about all of these reasons. We could cite all of these sources, but the thing that we have to do is prove our value. And we shouldn't have to prove our value. Just like in Texas, just within the past week, the governor decided to increase the salary for teachers by $5,000. They did not include librarians as teachers. So librarians have to now fight to be called teachers in this state, which is kind of amazing that we have to fight for that title that we've earned through our degrees, through our teaching, through our professions. So one of the things, I want to talk about a few things that you can do to ensure that there are librarians in your school, and it really has to start with your state legislators and looking at it from a state perspective as well as a local perspective. So the Pennsylvania Department of Education, as well as the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, developed a collaborative document called the Pennsylvania Guidelines for School Library Programs. A lot of states have these, and a lot of states have been updating them because we have new national standards from the American Association of School Librarians. As we are developing these, or as we did develop them, we had several tiers of experts look at them, and the major criticism that we received about this document, which is going to be published shortly, is that it didn't include statistics from the previous document, statistics about how many librarians there should be per student, how much budget should be allocated to technology, how much budget should be allocated toward books. And the reality is, and the tough message that we had to send to the people is that we don't have any current research that says that give us those numbers. There were numbers from 2010 that were done in a research study, and this is 9 years later. And then people argued, well, why does Louisiana have it in their state guidelines? Well, they have it in their school code. those numbers about the number of librarians, the amount of resources, the number of technology is actually in school code. So that's where one of the places that we have to start. You have to ask to be part of the process. We're not going to just be invited to the table. So when our state developed their ESSA plan, we, as a organization of Pennsylvania School Librarians Associations, worked through our Office of Commonwealth Libraries to ask to have a seat at the table. And I was in one of the ESSA work groups on educator effectiveness, and my message there was that librarians are specialists. We have a specialized skill, we have an expertise, and our job is really different than those of other teachers. So in that particular forum, I was talking about how we should be evaluated. But at the same time, the other people at the table were the leaders of the state education programs, the leaders in our government, the leaders in other organizations, parent-teacher organization. So they were hearing these messages also. So we have to talk about that. The second one, in our state, we just were reviewing our Chapter 49 regulations about certification. And right now in Pennsylvania, if you have a teacher certification, you can take a test and become a school librarian. So we worked really hard with the people at the state to say, truly we have a different set of skills as librarians. And even if that doesn't happen, we're at the table, we're having that discussion with them. We also, in our state, have been working with the Pennsylvania Department of Education policymakers. We have a certified staffing policy guideline, CSPG 48, which defines what a school librarian is. And we have worked over the past 2 years to change the language from any teacher is able to be in a school library program, running a school library, to it has to be a certified school librarian who is running those programs. The problem that we're running into and the thing that we're still working with is what is the definition of a library program? For some people, for some school districts, they define it as a room with books and checkout, and then some have programs involving information literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, teaching classes. So right now, the school district can define whether or not they have a school library program. This staffing policy requires that they have one certified school librarian in their district if they have a program, but they get to define whether or not they have that. We also have had House bills and Senate bills introduced to be sure that there's one school in every school, certified school librarian. And a lot of our decision makers say they like school library, or like school libraries, or even love libraries. But to save our libraries, we need them to fight for school libraries. As legislators become more focused on teacher accountability, we have to consider strategies that libraries might use to ensure language for equitable funding for every school. And we really have to focus on building coalitions. There is a need for school librarians to identify local evidence-based practice to prove their value. And again, I hate to say that we have to prove our value, but if we stay in the traditional role of school librarian, and if we maintain the perceptions out there that school librarians simply check out books, then it's going to be very difficult to, as much research as we share out there about academic achievement and learning outcomes, it's not going to be convincing if that's not what we're seeing in our schools. So the final thing that I'm going to say before I pass it on is one of the most difficult things is, as much as the librarian is the expert in digital literacy, media literacy, information literacy, we are not a tested subject, but we support the tested subjects because it is through the skills that we can teach our students that they learn that content and they learn their skills. So in terms of entrepreneurial efforts, workforce development, career and college readiness, all of those things we can focus on, and we have to show how that we are actually supporting those teachers and making the library a place that is not just a space that they walk into, but a feeling they have, a literacy feeling they have when they walk through those doors.
That's real cool. So one of the areas of great interest to me is how the for-profit businesses out there have been taking aim at the school library and saying, oh, you have a spare space, let's turn it into something like a maker space, let's turn it into something like a STEM lab, and hollow it out. It's one of the reasons we've got a legacy of emptiness in a lot of these school libraries, because like Kafi said, you don't just put the books up, what happens after the lights go out, you know? I want to talk with Ozzy, about this and hear what you have to say, because you're bringing the perspective, as I've seen, the giant room between the maker movement and the outcomes that should be happening in school libraries. I'm looking forward to hearing what you got to say.
Sure. So yeah, I'm the founder of the Giant Room. It's an innovation hub for children in elementary and middle school. And as basically the whole idea is to create a space for children to join together, come up with problems that they care to solve, and actually roll up their sleeves, get messy, and bring those ideas into reality. And the whole idea is to provide access to resources, mentorship, and community support these students need to actually build the world they want to live in, because that's how we could make sure they will be ready for the future, whatever that future is. And as part of my work, I've been basically part of my work at Giant Room and also previous roles at Little Bits and Tigley. We've worked with many schools to bring these ideas of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology into their school programs, and in a way that actually results in student achievement and solving equity problems in terms of accessing and working with technology. And one of the interesting patterns that I've seen working with schools is the active role of librarians and libraries in bringing this innovation into schools, but also working with teachers across different disciplines and different grade levels to scale up these STEAM movements. And this was very interesting to us because we weren't expecting librarians necessarily would take on this active role. And we wanted to dig in a little bit more, see what's going on there. And one framework that helped me to understand this phenomena was to start thinking of libraries as an innovation hubs. And it has three basically folds into it. The first one is, if a library is an innovation hub, which has always been the space you go there to access information, it used to be that those informations were shared within books. Now the information is being shared and basically transferred across different media in addition to books, across internet, VR, AR, and all sorts of technologies. So if librarians only focus on books, then we are actually omitting access to many of the new forms of information that are available in these new types of technologies. And librarians do understand that very well. When they have access to the funding, when they have access to the professional development that help them to understand these new technologies, they want to bring those into libraries because they see that it adds to the whole mission of library as a space to have access to literacy. And it also goes beyond just the mere access to those information. It's about the timing. If it takes up, I don't know, like a minimum 1 to 2 years to publish a book, with these new forms of technology, it's almost instantaneous. So it's very important for librarians to know how to work with, to be comfortable with these new technologies, to be comfortable with this new digital literacy, to be able to provide information to students and also to teachers at a timely manner. The second part of this framework goes beyond access to information, and that goes to any standard that we'll see, from Common Core to ESSA to really name it. It's about learning the information, but also having students to apply those knowledge in new ways and create new types of information. And that is very important to think about it. How would it change the way we look at the information hubs, which are the libraries? It's a space to access, but also to create new types of knowledge. And when you look at the librarians, they do see themselves as basically advocates of bringing this type of maker education and having students to invent and create new types of information as one important part of their role. In fact, we did a research with School Library Journal, and we asked the librarians, about 400 plus librarians participated in the research. And we asked them how do they see maker activities changing the way the libraries play a role. And they said more than 60% of them are actually dedicating space for these maker activities. And that's not just for the sake of children or students come up with these like different projects. It's for the sake of them actually reflecting of the ideas they read in the books, or reflecting of the ideas they have access through internet, whatever it is, and bringing those into projects that they could then connect it to their English class or math class or science class. And all librarians, and again, all librarians, and there were more than 420 librarians, say they either have an active role in bringing these maker education ideas into their schools, or they do want to have that active role. And the top blockers are access to funding, and professional development. It is something that librarians do want to be involved. It is needed by every standard, and students want this, and teachers do want to have that support of bringing these new ideas, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, maker education into their curriculum, but then there are only limited resources. The third aspect of this framework is having access, creating information, and then thinking about a library really as a hub. How can, it is the largest classroom, but also it's the only classroom that all teachers across different grade levels, different subject areas, and all students could actually go together and form a community there. And the reason it's very important to think about that community aspect of libraries and the role of, active role of librarians to basically create this resource community is thinking about career readiness and future of work. When you look at almost every report into what type of skills students need to earn to be ready for the future, it is of course being great in literacy, math, and sciences, and also learning how to code. But it's also a lot of the focus is on communication skills, creativity, being able to work in teams, being able to work with people with different backgrounds, different age groups. And the best place to be able to leverage these skills and practice these so-and-so 21st century skills or soft skills is within the libraries. And librarians have a very active role in creating the culture around these type of skills. So students could come in and engage in those community building ideas. And before I pass it on, I wanted to basically talk about how this framework could change the way we think about professional development for librarians. First, I hope we've all mentioned that it is important to have a certified school librarians. And then, I want to say it should even go beyond that. School librarians need to be more comfortable around technology. They need to be comfortable with digital literacy, and to be the resource for all students and all teachers to be directed to ways that they could actually cultivate those skills. And also, it would be great for librarians to have access to maker education, professional development that are focused on maker education and coding, not necessarily to turn every librarian into a coder, but making them feel comfortable with not only using technology, but also using technology to create new knowledge. And one of the main examples that I always love to talk about at this is to think about when we talk about maker education, libraries, and STEM. There's this research at Tufts University, which they call it novel engineering. It is basically having students with a teacher or in a library read a book of their choice, and it could be based on their grade level, whichever book they want, and then come up with a way to help someone in the book, or identify a problem in the book, and then use the technology, the tools that are available in the library to actually create prototype of solutions for the problem they identified. And what they found was that not only this way of looking at integrating literacy, problem solving, and within different areas, help students reading readiness, and also help their engagement with reading, but it actually helped improve their scores in whatever subject area they're trying to teach. So it's not only about focusing on reading, but it's actually trying to think how you could use library as an asset and librarian as a resource or chief information officer to bring this all together in a meaningful way.
This is really interesting to me. I'm not a librarian. I've never worked in a library. I come at this from the civilian's perspective. I care about infrastructure, which is why we're running a political action committee that's focused on funding for libraries and funding for school librarians. The infrastructure that's in place. I want to turn it over to the Slido questions first, if I could, and check in with, there's one really interesting one here. So, the idea of curriculum, if I may. The curriculum for aspiring librarians in college, and then the idea also in one of these questions about the curriculum, it says, we are frequently asked why we don't have a curriculum. The debate for and against goes back and forth. Is there any evidence that having a curriculum works? So 2 tiers here. One is how do we train the next generation of school librarians properly? But there's an ad hoc kind of curriculum that you were just describing. Allison, to your point about the it's all ad hoc right now. Let me stop talking. What do you think? Grab your mic, please.
To higher ed curriculum, because I failed to mention that at Wayne State we are offering an abbreviated pathway. So traditionally the school library endorsement is coupled with a master's in library and information science, but we've reduced that to a 15-hour certificate program. So what do we teach? And how do we keep a pace with the changes in K-12 realities, fold in these numerous roles, continue to be future ready. So the one thing is that we're based on standards. The American Association of School Librarians does have standards that guide our curriculum. So being program leaders, information specialists, so there's these competencies that we obviously have to hit. But the question talks about how might this get tied into school library partnerships between colleges of ed and ISDs. I'm going to talk a little bit about an idea I have that's not in practice, but it's happening in colleges of ed. For example, Teach Detroit is a initiative in the College of Ed through Wayne State where pre-service teachers get exposed to kind of in-service training before they get to the practicum student teaching course. So they get mentored shadowing opportunities in the first course. They go to a school and they'll shadow a professional teacher. I'm looking to do something like that with school librarians because I think it's going to be incumbent on us to partner with school districts. We can no longer just, we don't, I think that we're doing a lot of this and Wayne State's doing it. I just think the school libraries could do it a little better in terms of our preparation program. So I'll be looking to identify districts who are willing to say, yes, we'll take, but they have to have a certified school librarian on staff. That's one of the issues is that you have to have someone who can mentor and provide that onboarding for a pre-service school librarian. So there's a number of opportunities and we can build on what's happening in colleges of ed. So my idea is to sort of have something similar to Teach Detroit for school librarians, so they would be placed in school, and maybe their practicum is a problem-based project that is aligned with what the school's mission is, and so their practicum is not some standalone hours out in a school district, but maybe it's a teacher who's already identified in that school who is going to be trained in school librarianship using problem-based learning and use their practicum experience for that. So we're hitting the standards and we are looking to do more outreach, but there's a challenge because as another question had, there are retirements and school principals aren't necessarily rehiring, so we have to do some creative, problem solving because we want to have them in front of trained school librarians, and if there's no one in that building, we have a kind of a logistical issue.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I wanted to address the curriculum at the school level. So there are a couple different ways to look at it because in elementary schools, a lot of times we have fixed schedules and the librarians teach classes. Secondary level, that doesn't always happen. So in our school district, and I know some school districts across the United States, we're looking at our elementary program, and instead of a standalone 30 lessons for the students like every 6 days throughout the school year, we're looking at a hybrid model so that the elementary teachers have a more flexible schedule so that they could spend maybe 6 days in a row with a class and to help them with the skills that they would need to in order to complete the project or the activity that they're working on at that time. Because when you see the students only every 6 days, 30 times a year, they're not holding on to those they're not holding on to those lessons, they're not holding on to that learning. So if we can integrate with the content area teachers and have them for an extended period of time, then maybe a period of time without it. The difficult thing with that right now is the librarians in my school district say, but I'm the teacher's planning period. So the only reason the teachers get a planning period is because the kids go to the library and the librarians have their instruction then. So we're working around scheduling issues. At the secondary level, I would not recommend having a library curriculum. What I do in my school and what I would highly recommend is for you to work with your assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction or your director of curriculum or with the other department chairs and integrate your curriculum into the content area curriculum. So in my school, at the high school and middle school levels, you will not see a library curriculum, but in the social studies, in the English, in the science curriculum, you will actually see what we would consider what the American Association of School Librarians standards, and we actually write in there partner with librarian. The words are listed there, and that's something that I fought for to make sure that if I am not teaching the lesson, then at least they are checking in with me and consulting with me to make sure they have the most up-to-date information about that particular skill.
I'll be quick. So in terms of curriculum, our approach when we work with schools is very similar to actually what you mentioned in terms of a hybrid approach. We have 4 modules at the Giants Room. The first one is to cultivate creative confidence. And that's when students go to the libraries and try to find new interests, whether it's through reading new books that the librarians are introducing to students, or a new types of projects, or a new exposure to new forms of real problems in their community. And then the second element is the idea of, we call it Ups and Rounds Lab, which once the students come up with a problem they care about, they talk with their librarians to identify the type of skills and the type of research they need to do to actually come up with solutions to those problems. And a lot of those will be connected to the content areas in the classroom. So if the student want to focus on how to make water more clean, or like cleaning, or a solar energy, then they will say, I need to learn this concept in my science classroom. I need to learn more about the history of why this, for example, water is not clean in my social history classroom, and I need to learn these specific skills in my coding or math classroom. So really identifying what type of skills they need from across different content areas to work on that one project that they're working in the innovation hub or information hub in the library. And then the third part is the idea of, again, a community. Once you have a solution, once you have a prototype, you share it with other students and other teachers. And there's a great place to do that in the libraries. And the role of librarians there is to help students to think about different projects in a critical way, and also to give and receive feedback to other students on their projects. And again, libraries are a great space for that. And the fourth one is once you have a solution, you share it with everyone. And that's when the whole, and that could be a presentation in front of your own classroom, or it could be actually an event in the library that you invite parents, invite different teachers and different students to present the information you have. So really, library is the hub to bring all this curriculum and all these ideas together in a meaningful way. That's it.
So the pedagogy here of having people in the room presenting things virtually is a little bit funny to me. Does anybody want to come up and talk at the mic for a moment or ask a question at the microphone? No, that's cool? Okay, cool. So we've got one question here from Chad that's been upvoted a bunch. It says many admins don't rehire when a school librarian retires because they've never seen the quality of a program. How do we educate and reach out to those admins?
Can I address that first? Okay. So right now there's an effort at the national level and then also at our state level to create administrator toolkits. So in the state of Pennsylvania, we are working together with a lobbyist. We're working with EveryLibrary. We're working within our association itself to actually create a toolkit so that we can hand to an administrator a one-pager about, that they could keep with them, so that we are handing to them questions, interview questions that they might ask a school librarian, a job description, so to help them understand what a good, an effective and meaningful librarian might be able to do and the skills that are involved. And at the national level, the American Association of School Librarians is also, their presidential initiative this year is focused on administrative advocacy. So they're at the national level putting a kit together that hopefully will be coming out at some point. They are identifying key stakeholder conferences, so administrator conferences and other stakeholder conferences where they are putting in proposals and presenting at those conferences, because our principals and administrators, our school boards, are the decision makers. So we don't want to preach to the choir. We want to actually go into the spaces where you're going to find those. They're also writing articles to be published in the educational leadership and some of the other larger publications. And again, they're coming up with a national toolkit, so that, I hope I'm not giving anything away. They're coming up with a national toolkit that has prepackaged Google Slides presentations with scripts so that they could present to their school board and personalize it so that they can present at a conference. So they're going to help us with that question, Chad, wherever you are in the room, thank you, to be able to just take this information, to personalize it for our own local context and to share that out in a professional way, package.
Just quickly on that point, and just really crass, but most administrators like to brag about their school and be able to have blue ribbons of excellence. So one of the things I think is a good approach that works is having those school library excellence awards, so a program being nominated for award that meets the rubric criteria for what aspects of a quality school librarian need to be present. So you hit two things. They get an accolade for their school, and they get to learn about, oh, this is what my school librarian should be doing. So you kind of educate them along the way. And just a case in point, in Detroit, our former superintendent who has passed, but Brian Whiston, in the school district he was at, all the school librarians were fired under his tenure, and he regretted that because once he became superintendent of schools, he was invited to our state school library association, which is another tactic I think that's great, is to invite leaders to the state school, give them Principal of the Year awards, or if they have a strong relationship with school libraries, commend them with awards. He really became one of the biggest advocates once he started seeing some of the awards that were given for strong school libraries. So just really championing what you do well and having principals be a part of giving them an award and giving them an excellence award. That's one thing you can do.
I would also ask yourself, what keeps your principal up at night? And then help to solve that problem, because we as librarians can do that.
Sorry.
It's just very quick back to what you were saying. One of the things we've seen is the idea of using competitions and challenges national level, and librarians have a very active role. One great example is STEMI, that is every year is an innovation challenge that many librarians participate in. It's just the idea of bringing awareness around these great programs that are happening in the libraries, and also brings recognition to schools, and that's when admins and principals get to know more about exactly what's happening in the largest classroom.
So folks, there's a lot to be said today about the role and the potential impacts. There's a lot of holes right now, though, out there around the country. These developments of standards, embedding the school librarian, the rubrics into curriculum, either at the legislative code or plan level. The idea of networking across different education training and college programs and university programs. And then there's a crisis moment. Part of it is why is marketing ourselves taboo? I want to put one thing out there for everybody in the room from EveryLibrary as a National Political Action Committee for Libraries. If we can be aspirational, we also sometimes need to do the rearguard action and help each other out in crisis. EveryLibrary exists as an organization in order to help support school librarians under crisis. We have a website called saveschoollibrarians.org. We do digital action not to the administration alone. We do digital action to activate the public and not just the PTA. The public who cares about the whole life of the child like you do. the public who cares about career readiness and college readiness like you do, the public who might not be aware that you've been out there because there's been an absence, and that we have to talk to them about what the negative would really be if it was truly realized. We're here to help at EveryLibrary in order to turn that around. I want to thank my colleagues today on this panel. Azadeh Jamalian, Allison Mackley, and Kafi Kumasi will be at Mugshots this evening. Mugshots on 7th, starting at 6 p.m. We're having a little librarian get-together. It's unofficial. We can't even use the hashtag. Hope to see you there. We'll be around for a few minutes afterwards. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.